And Moi then, like Kenyatta before him, thought that one of the major things that you ought to do when you are an African chieftain is to acquire land. And I believe that the Moi family is perhaps one of the largest landowners in this country. Mwai Kibaki follows very closely. And of course, when Moi left, having destroyed and brought this country to its knees, Mwai Kibaki came in. When Mwai Kibaki came in the year 2002, for the first time, I saw a country that was united. Mwai Kibaki was voted for on the platform of national unity. The votes he received were essentially protest votes, not positive votes. They were protest votes against Moi and his project. But he should have used those votes in a positive way. He did not. What he did is to immediately allow himself to be captured by the same ethnic cabal and reignited the Kenyatta days. And if mediocrity had reached its zenith during Moi's day, mediocrity reached its lowest point during Mwai Kibaki's day. And as we talk now, you know that every other country in the region doesn't think much of us. That is why the Ugandan president can say the things that he says, because he knows we are absent at the top. That is the reality. And I'm submitting to you that it is that environment that has been the breeding ground of the country that we have, where mobilization is on the basis of ethnicity. The 2007 elections were actually conducted on the basis of ethnic mobilization. Every ethnic chieftain and warlord brought his tribe to what I call the national political mortgage market. And in that mortgage market, what you arrive at the table of negotiation is your tribe. So if you come from Nyanza and your ethnic chief is Raila Odinga, who has hypnotized you and stopped you from thinking, then he brings you to the political mortgage market. He then, if he finds that the Kalenjins are not organized, allows them to identify their own ethnic chieftains. And they did it as we watched, complete with animal skins and animal tails. And we watched it. And he created another ethnic warlord. Then we went to Kambani and identified another ethnic warlord. Then we went to Graves in Western Province and created another ethnic warlord. We all were present and saw when we went to the graves of Nabongo Mumia in order to create another ethnic warlord. We then went to Mombasa and went to the Kaya elders, semi-literate and all. And we created another Kaya leader. And we mobilized, whether we want to say it or not, against the Kikuyu. The rest of the nation mobilized against the Kikuyu, and the Kikuyu retreated into their ethnic cocoon. And they were sending SMS saying, the house of Mumbi must be protected. It did not take a Jewish prophet nor the son of one to predict that there would be violence. We could see that we went to the elections on the basis of we must win. And the Kikuyus under PNU, and the Luos, the Kambas, the Kalenjins under ODM also went on the basis that we must win. And that is how we created a powder keg that then exploded, and we say that we were surprised. I was not. So negative ethnicity. And my good friend, Professor Seka said it very well. You of the middle class are the culprits. In many instances, what we do is that we complain in our little ethnic cocoons. But we are the ones who are quick to follow the ethnic warlords, because we are the ones who expect to be appointed in this or that office. People refuse to think. One of the greatest problems in Africa today is the failure and or refusal of the intelligentsia to think and to reason objectively, so that the Luo will follow their warlord of a low voltage kind. Whether that warlord is right or wrong, it is the messenger, not the message that counts. And that, I think, is a tragedy which has then reinforced negative ethnicity. And you only need to attend funerals and weddings to listen to these ethnic warlords. what they say in their idioms and in their proverbs, in their unguarded moments. That is what represents who they are. When they come to the national television, they reason like every American politician because they are playing to that gun. So one of the things that I think has created an environment that has nearly destroyed this country is negative ethnicity. The other one is corruption. And corruption and ethnicity are Siamese twins. Because in our minds, our ethnic kind can do no wrong. When a Kikuyu thief who is in government makes a mistake, the Kikuyus, to the man and to the woman, will support them. When a Luo thief in parliament does the same thing, our Luo can do no wrong. Our Kamba can do no wrong. And I apologize to the Vice Chancellor, and I'm not demeaning your qualification, but we have degenerated so much that even in academics, the Vice Chancellor of this university, because it is in Kalenjin land, must be a college. In Maseno University, the Vice Chancellor must be a Luo. In Masinda Muliro University, the Vice Chancellor must be a Luhya. In Pwani University, the principal must be from the Midi-Kenya. And you go on and on, the principal in Kisii must be a Kisii. How can you create a country? Mr. Vice Chancellor, I believe that even Adodera, Kango campus, they demand that there be a Luo principal. How can you build a country of that kind? When we sacrifice merit at the altar of ethnicity, then we say that we are a country that is moving in the right direction. That is naked corruption. And until men and women rise in sufficient numbers to raise their voice against this kind of heresy, then this country is going nowhere. Corruption, we see it on a daily basis. We see it in parliament. We see it through the mega scandals. We see men and women whose income we know about wallowing in wealth, while we are one of the most unequal societies in the world. While 80% of our wealth is owned by 10%, it is a recipe for disaster. Indeed, commentators now say that Kenya has satisfied 9 but 1 of all the ingredients of a failed state. I would not be surprised if some DJ rose out one day and behold, they seized this country. If you doubt, ask yourself why today this country has militia groups, the Mungiki, the Baghdad boys, the Chinkororo and the Amachu, the Sungusungu, the Taliban, the Sabah Land Defense Forces. The only thing that they don't have are guns and grenades and mortars. Our army is only 40,000. Mungiki has membership exceeding 1 million. If you give each one of them a Kalashnikov, our army cannot match them. Those are the ingredients of a failed state. And I am telling you that we have all the ingredients of Yugoslavia in this country. If you doubt, 2 months before Yugoslavia broke into different states, a poll was conducted, and it was said that 80% of them believed that they were more Yugoslavian than Croats and Serbs and Slovenes and Albanians and Moldavans. But 2 months later, the country was Balkanized. When therefore I talk about corruption and ethnicity, and I listen to our politicians and even some in the intelligentsia saying we want more districts, we want a province of our own, then I know that this country is in danger of being God-forsaken. Corruption is a cancer that we must fight. We will, Professor Seka, talk about it in these forums. But I believe there comes a time when we must liberate ourselves from the chains of philosophization and historization of the subject into the arena by rolling up our sleeves. Are we prepared in this arena to do that? Or for how long are we going to talk? This is the question. It is not about symposia. Symposia are meant to sharpen us so that we may go out into the society and we may energize the society. The other thing is about culture. It is the great Alexis de Tocqueville who said, if there is going to be a revolution, it is either a cultural revolution or there is no revolution. And when we talk about a culture, what do we mean? Alexis de Tocqueville identified three things that you must have in order to underpin democracy. He said, we must have the laws. He said, we must have the economy, and we must have a culture. We today have laws which we only honor and preach. We saw the other day when the Speaker of the National Assembly gave an interpretation of the law which is a jurisprudential heresy. But this country celebrated him. We celebrated what any lawyer, what he saw anywhere in the world would not have arrived at this conclusion. But we celebrated because it was politically convenient. For how long shall we allow ourselves to walk down the slippery path of political expedience? We are merely postponing the day the guillotine will fall because we are treating symptoms rather than the real cause. And I dare say, those who choose to treat cancer with malaria quinine will sooner die of it. And this is what this country is doing. We are going against the prescriptions of Alexis de Tocqueville. And if you want to know that this country has lost all respect for the law, just go to Nairobi and look at how people behave when the traffic lights turn red against them. They don't care. They don't care, and it tells you that the country is now moving in the lawless path. And that is why when Mungiki are ravaging in Western Province, the police gleefully said, the vigilantes will help us. The vigilantes have now become a Frankenstein monster, and they are now doing the very same thing that the Mungiki were doing. Then we talk about the economy. Today I read in the newspapers that in schools where the government is providing school lunch, parents are queuing with their own children to be given food. When you live in a country where the government says that it cannot feed 10 million, it means that the government cannot feed 20 million because governmental statistics are always sexed up. And that is what is happening in this country. We cannot feed ourselves. We live in Nairobi, 75% of the population lives in informal settlement, a recipe for disaster. And then about what is the culture? We live in a country where we believe in nothing, Professor Aseka said, about ideology. When we talk about ideology, we are still imprisoned in the old pre-Soviet days when it was communism. That is not ideology. Ideology has taken a quantum leap, and we are now saying, what are the real things? What are the programs that we have for our population? And I'm submitting to you that time has come that we as a country must liberate ourselves from the muck and mire and the morass of confusion and lack of direction. So much for sorrows and lamentations. Let us now do what we must, to ask ourselves, how shall we liberate ourselves from the chains and the manacles of confusion? What must we do? There are many things. I call them a buffet of possible treatments. One of them that we have been talking about is a new constitutional dispensation. My good friend Yashpal Gai says, and I agree with him, that Africa has become a graveyard of beautiful constitutions. And indeed it is a graveyard. Ask the Eritreans. They have a beautiful constitution whose implementation has been suspended by President Isaias Afwerki. Go to Uganda. We have a 1995 constitution which is honored more in breach. Go to Ethiopia, the 1984 constitution is honored in breach. Go to Nigeria of Umaru Yar'Adua, where we now have a group that wants to secede. The constitution is honored in breach. We have all the beautiful laws in this country except one law. The one that says that we must obey all the other laws. And indeed, that law is unwritten, that law is unalterable, is the law of morality, is the law of culture. It can only be inscribed in our hearts and minds. What do we believe in? What is Kenya? Does Kenya exist? or Kenya is a legal fiction. You know, writing several years ago, Chinua Achebe said that Nigeria is a geographical fiction. It is a place where we, the Igbo and the Yoruba, find ourselves gridlocked. And if you doubt me, Nigeria's name was even given by Lord Lugard's girlfriend. We can barely identify with it. That is why there is no Nigeria, in fact. Nigeria is a trophy for which we compete during elections, that we may rape and take that which belongs to it. And I want to tell you that in minds of politicians, Kenya is a geographical fiction. I want you to listen to the political leaders, Mwai Kibaki, in the unguarded moments, Raila Odinga in the unguarded moments. They never talk about Kenya. And the imagery that they use about Kenya, Kenya is an antelope, they say, which they divide as a war spoil. Kenya is a loaf of bread, they say, which they divide 50-50. Kenya is not a motherland to be cherished alone. When you hear political leaders describe a country which they are entrusted to govern in that way, you know that destruction is begging. I am saying, however, that a new constitutional dispensation is an important thing, not as a magic wand which will solve all our problems, but as a necessary bedrock upon which we can begin to build. But will we have a new constitution? Yes, we will have a new constitution. But what kind of a constitution? A political pact between the parties called PNU and ODM. That will be the constitution that we'll have. What is PNU and ODM? It is a club of individuals who have engaged in political incest for the last 40 years. What do I mean? That you can pick out those who started engaging in politics in 1950s and 1940s, keep on mutating. And if you look at the faces, it reminds me of an Orwellian revolution recorded in Animal Farm. The animals looked from man to pig and from pig to man again, and there was no difference. If you permit me to give an imagery that I love giving, what keeps on changing in Kenya is the forest, but the monkeys are the very same. Why do I say so? Because if you look at the PNU and the ODM, they are born and bred in the KANU School of Politics and Economics. And I can dare say that in the KANU School of Politics and Economics, the following courses were never offered. Reform was never offered in that school. Hatred for corruption was never offered in that. Nationhood was never offered. But the major courses were corruption, how to be corrupt, and how to use your ethnicity for personal benefit. When you measure in those two things, how can you then be transformational leaders? We'll have a constitution, but what is your role? This is the question. You must rise up and be able to say with one accord that you will use that constitution to a good end. The next thing that I think ought to be done is that we must transform leadership. So leadership is critical if this country is to make the next quantum leap. If I talk to you Kenyans, and I talk to the Kalenjins in this room, how many of you are in ODM, actively or otherwise, simply because you think that it protects your ethnic group? How many of you Luos who are here and Luhias are in ODM, simply because your ethnic warlord has hypnotized you? This is the question, and we must liberate ourselves from the hypnosis. How many are in PNU here simply because your ethnic leader is in it? We must believe in something in order to transform the leadership. The electoral system. My good friend Professor Seka talked about it. I'm now talking about reconciliation and rediscovery. And Mr. Chairman, you will give me a little latitude because I'm talking about things that come from my heart. Electoral systems. Right now, the country is engaged and the president is on a spree of handing down districts. The president sits somewhere, having occasionally and periodically and spasmodically liberated himself from his otherwise known lethargy. And he says, I create 222 districts. And he tells the population, build the district headquarters. We are creating a huge bureaucracy which we cannot run. As I speak to you today, we have the largest cabinet in the world, 42 cabinet ministers. We have sinecure officers. We have a president, a vice president, a prime minister, a deputy prime minister, a second deputy prime minister, a minister for housing, ministry for livestock, ministry for fish. When you live in such a country, you know that ethnicity is the driving force, and we cannot afford that luxury. I'm therefore saying that if we are to reconcile and rediscover Kenya, we must go to the basics and begin to address those key issues. The next thing is civic awareness that my good friend Professor Seka worked eloquent on as he spoke. It is Albert Einstein who said there is nothing more dangerous than ignorance in action. And I'm submitting to you that the tragedy of this country is ignorance in action. The speed with which men and women who do not know are quick to share their unschooled opinions on critical issues of the country. I'm submitting to you that we must re-examine and ask ourselves, what kind of civic education have we been handing down to our kids? Is it donor-driven civic education? Those who are in the business of civic education, I'm not saying that our friends of goodwill should not fund us. But when civic education is dictated by donor countries and our reports are written to London, Paris, Stockholm, and Brussels, then the agenda is not defined here. The agenda does not address the real issues here. Africa must now begin, and Kenya must now begin, to offer civic education that responds to the realities on the ground. I love what John Carson, the Undersecretary for Africa, said yesterday, that the United States of America is a great and a powerful country, but it will not rescue Kenya. Kenya must be rescued by Kenyans. And if we doubt that that is a legitimate statement, how many failed states are close to the United States? Haiti is not very far from the United States. The Americans could not save it. What are we teaching in our universities? In many of these universities, Mr. Vice Chancellor, you know that when your student organizations are engaged in election, they congregate along tribal lines. They constitute the Western Alliance against the Central Province Alliance. So that even our young minds are already being indoctrinated with the ideology of negative ethnicity. Kenya is at a crossroads. The question is, which route do we take? The well-trodden path of ethnicity or the uncharted path of morality and selfless leadership? It is the duty of educationists to lead from the front. Many are the times when I attend rallies and I see our academicians kowtow to semi-literate political leaders. Those of you from the United States, you may not know this. I'm not talking of this audience. But if a semi-educated counselor were to enter this room in other gatherings, unwittingly and robotically, the people would rise. And everything would be interrupted, and the semi-literate counselor would be invited by the chair to share his wisdom with the gathering. That is the low level to which we have ascended, so that we allow people who do not know to tell us what they do not know. And we use that as the driving force in our country. We cannot allow that. And I'm saying, therefore, that we who have the privilege of education, we must ask ourselves how to use it. It is Alexander Pope who said, a little modernity is a dangerous thing. Drink deep the western spring or taste not. And I'm submitting to you that we drank a little of it and we are tipsy and we are not deeply immersed in it. And this is our confusion. This is why we have paper qualification, but our conduct does not match our training. Time has come that we must ask ourselves whether we have education for livelihood or education for life. And I'm submitting that something must be done to our school curriculum. Then I'm talking about regional integration. You know, a small fish in a small pond sometimes confuses itself for a whale or a shark. And I'm beginning to think that part of the resolution to the Kenyan and African problem is to move into the East African project sooner rather than later, so that these low-voltage ethnic warlords are arrested and paralyzed before they become high-voltage warlords like the Somali warlords. As I draw to the conclusion of my presentation, I believe that this country can reconcile itself if we have that platform and those issues which I think ought to be addressed for the purpose of reconciliation. But yet there are a number of things that must also be done. I believe that this country has embraced and worshipped at the altar of impunity for far too long. In 1992 we had ethnic clashes. In 1997 we had ethnic clashes. Nothing was done to the perpetrators whom we know. They have now become monsters and they believe that they can do anything they want without fear of consequence. In 2007, we know who were involved in these ethnic clashes, and my good friend here mentioned this. I read on the internet during that period when people, Kenyans in the diaspora, were raising money that they may buy machetes for their ethnic group in Kenya to participate in ethnic mayhem. If this country is to be liberated, the perpetrators of ethnic violence must be punished. You know, sometimes I hear people say, let us tamper justice with mercy. Very good. But even if you want to be spiritual about it, God was very clear about it. We punish you first, then we'll be merciful later. I would want to see the individuals, and some of them irritate us even now on television on a daily basis, on radio on a daily basis. We read about them in the newspapers, and we suffer as a nation from collective amnesia and selective memory. History teaches us that Israel and the world is still following those who are perpetrators of the Holocaust. How can we forget what happened a year ago? Until the day we punish these individuals so that the victims of their injustice feel that they have been punished, the country will never recover. Yet I believe, as I conclude, that this country is a great country in prosperity. I believe that this country indeed is the natural leader in East Africa. If you doubt it, even as we are now, our economy is larger than the economy of Uganda and Tanzania combined. We have the ingredients, but we are conducting ourselves in a manner that is inimical to the realization of what is good in prosperity. And I believe that as we are assembled here today, it can be done, it must be done, and we have no choice but to do it. So today, as I conclude, I now want to ask you Kenyans who are present. These ghosts of ethnicity that occupy your minds and hearts, these ghosts of corruption, which make you to condemn corruption not because you hate it, but because you do not have the opportunity to be corrupt. These ghosts of mediocrity that occupy you, when will you exercise them? Because we must do it. Otherwise, there will be no country for your children and children's children. As I said at a conference on the Kenya we won, I said that there comes a time in the history of any nation when it must make choices. And my good friend, Professor, some of us may not believe in God, but I believe in God. That there comes a critical time in the history of any country when a decision must be made. And in the Bible, I see a number of instances. One is to be read in the book of Kings, when you meet a man called the prophet Elijah. And he says, because he's disgusted, he says, today let Israel make a decision. If Baal is God, let him be worshipped. And if God is God, let him be worshipped. We too today must make a choice. If we want to worship the God of ethnicity, let us take that choice. If we want to worship God and the God of meritocracy, let us make that choice. And the last choice that we must make also from the Bible is that there is no shortage of latter-day Nebuchadnezzars. They will allow you and invite you to enter into the furnace, heated 7 times with the sticks of ethnicity and corruption. And the spirit that you must have is the spirit of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The question is, do you have that spirit? And the final example that I give you is to be found in the book of the prophet Joshua. When they are going to Israel, he tells the Israelites, choose you now whom you shall serve. The Lord of the Amorites or the Lord God. As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. Kenya has reached a crossroad, and we must make that choice. Choose you now whom you shall serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Piero. At the beginning, I told you you prepare for a great speech. And you concur with me, we have had and listened to great speech. Because of time, but this is something which you can sacrifice a few more minutes if you allow. I would allow 3 questions here, 3 questions there, and 3 questions on the other side.
Okay, from AUPY. I'm a student in the School of Social Work. I've been having a burning question and I waited for him to come today. This is about the Constitution, which has been cited all the time that that's the main cause of our problem. You were one of the fellows who were involved in the draft which was rejected by Kenyans. When I came home in 2006, I got a draft and actually I have it in the United States. When I went through the draft, I could not believe Kenyans rejected that kind of draft constitution. Now, one thing I came to learn is it possible to entirely do away with an old constitution and they get a new constitution? I've never had a country which does that. Even in the United States of America, they do amendments. Why can't amendments be done? Many Kenyans who are in the United States have been wanting to be Kenyan citizens. I've been one of them. I filled forms in my house. I've been trying to send it to the immigration, but when I think that I'm giving up my citizenship for Kenya, I say no, I'm not going to Kenya on a visa. Why can't the amendments be made? The second thing I want to clarify. We really did raise some money for some candidates for these past elections. I attended one fundraising for a candidate from Nyaliba Nchache in Kisii, the one who lost Mr. Nyachae. We really didn't raise money to come and start killing people around. We were supporting the candidates so that they are able to move around and do their campaigns. If there are some who did that, we are not aware. I'll give my paper on the mistake.
I know ethnicity is a ghost. We have been made to believe that there is tribalism in Kenya. But it is the elite at the top that takes us for granted to incite us against one another for their own benefit. That is the only time when ethnicity comes up. Why don't we ever have ethnic clashes except during elections? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. And ethnicity is a ghost because I know, and I've always wanted to say this, that when I was in trouble, it was not a Kikuyu who saved me. I lived with my family for 3 nights in a Kalenjin's house. Thank you.
The tissue is already rotten. How are we going to bring the perpetrators to book? And that is why Kenyans are now yelling, they think the head is the back. Maybe you should tell us.
As the secretary of the body, and I can tell you that I was amazed. In 2002, we released the draft in 19th of September 2002. It was hailed as the best constitution. And I remember at that time, we then, with myself, with the chairman, Yash Guy, did a brief to President Moi to convince him that he was best suited to deliver a constitution. And he was persuaded, to his credit. And he sent feelers saying, can I extend the life of Parliament? And the people refused, not even 1 minute. Then they said they would deliver a constitution in 100 days, then it all changed. And I've seen politicians, some of the things that they are now recommending are the very same things that they rejected. And we have always had a two-step approach, that if we cannot get the whole, we can do a minimum package. And some of the things that are not contentious, like dual citizenship, I don't think anybody is quarreling. But it's also true that countries have actually replaced entire constitutions. In this country, some may or may not disagree, but in this country, in 1969, after our own constitution had been amended 10 times, we reorganized and reissued the constitution as Act number 5 of 1969. And if you look at that constitution and the independent constitution, they are totally different. The Malawians have done it, the Ugandans in 1995, the Democratic Republic of Congo, of course, those are post-conflict constitutions, the Nigerians in 1979, the Beninois in 1990. There is no shortage of examples. But Kenya, which is ironic, that our own model has been used to produce a constitution in Afghanistan, our own model and our staff were used to produce a constitution in Afghanistan, used to produce a constitution in Iraq, and used to produce a constitution in Nepal. But we, because of poor quality leadership, cannot have a constitution. This year, next year, we'll have one. Because what will happen is that the ethnic warlords will move around the country and tell their hypnotized population to vote for it. That is the tragedy in this country. And my view is, if the constitution does have good elements, perhaps we had better endorse it, and then we can incrementally begin to work on the little things. I hope that that will happen. But I myself know for a fact of individuals who are raising money to buy machetes and sent it to individuals in different parts of this country to actually buy weapons. And they were bought. So you may have raised for the campaigns, but there are people who are in the business of raising money for that kind of thing. Then the leadership. I've written a small book immediately after my experience in the electoral process called A Call for Political Hygiene in Kenya. And in that book, it's a very small book, and in that book I tell my story. First of all, those of you who know, I chose not to join any of the political parties. And people from my ethnic group kept on sending me SMS saying, you are a traitor. I said, in order to be a traitor, you must have a pact on which you agree, which you betray. I never entered into a pact with anyone. And the reason I went to the National Defense Force and told them I'm going to contest an election during a lecture and lose that election. But it's important so that I may have the moral high ground, which I now think I have. To tell the people that I came to elections on a platform of issues, but people are not interested in issues. They used to tell me, we want to elect you, but you are in the wrong party. And the person who was purportedly elected in the constituency where I was, remember that constituency did not have the results declared for 8 months. And when they were declared, they were asked to verify the votes, and they did not. They just declared a winner. And we know that 21 ballot boxes were burnt, were never recovered. In a country where people who stand on principle cannot be elected, the people of Tetu rejected Wangari Maathai and Nobel laureate. That is the country in which we are operating. And I am saying that that kind of leadership is the kind of leadership which is also an indictment of the people who are the voters. I remember when 2 weeks ago I was talking to a group of young men in Nairobi, and one of them said, I voted against you because you do not come from the ethnic group that I wanted to vote for. I apologize. And I told him that is the beginning of repentance. And on that point, I want to give you a very interesting example. When I wanted to contest the elections, I wrote a letter to the provost of my church, asking him to pray for my candidacy. This is how he responded. He said, the person you want to replace also worships in this church. And I asked him, has he written to you to pray for him? He said, no. He says, it is I who has written, why are you not praying for me? He then called me to lunch at the Fairview Hotel in Nairobi. Because he did not know my ethnic group, this is how his prayer went. He prayed against an ethnic group which I belong to, because he thought I belonged to another ethnic group. My book, A Call for Political Action, and that is the country. The question of 2012, I believe if the nation takes, if the nation makes a resolve, if we go into the country, I've gone throughout this country, I know this country well, because I've walked through it when we were doing the Constitution, and I know it well. And I've walked through this country in the last 1 year, and I have a feeling that Kenyans want change. I have that feeling. And what they need is a group of men and women representing the face of Kenya who will walk out and come out without fear of consequence. Many of us fear to lose jobs. This is the problem. I remember, as I conclude that being in the year 2003, we were cited for contempt of court by, with myself and Yash Guy, because we had refused to obey a court order stopping us from discussing the judiciary as we were making the Constitution. And I went to a public gathering such as this, and I said that I am now told there is a court of law which has issued an order. And I'm now faced with a dilemma, I said, that in order that I'm required to obey an order of a court of law, and there is also another judgment of a court of public opinion. And I said, I refuse to obey the order of the court of law without fear of consequence. The judge then cited us for contempt of court. And we were supposed to be jailed for 6 months. When I went home, my little daughter told me, can we buy me jeans to go to jail with? And I was very happy, because she understood that there comes a time when there must be sacrifice. Right now we have Damian Yu, who committed an offense 50 years ago and is going to be indicted. So a properly crafted local tribunal is not bad. The only thing that I would want in that statute, they should resign if they are cabinet ministers. They should not be entitled to pay. I think those who engage in gross violation should be in custody during the whole period of trial. Why? Because if they are let loose, they are going to intimidate witnesses and they are going to mobilize people from their ethnic group to protect them. So that, I think, we should go a local tribunal. If we don't and cannot have a local tribunal, then go special tribunal. Revolution comes. History demonstrates that King Louis XIV goes. It demonstrates that Nikolai Koshesco goes. It demonstrates that the Romanovs go. So don't be worried.
For that very electrifying presentation. I wanted to ask you a question about the issue of federalism. Many writers have presented our discussions on that particular aspect. And they have said that where a community is as ethnicized as ours, one alternative is to give them regional governments where they can take care of their own interests at that local level. Because what has happened at national level is that we have priced the presidency so expensively that it becomes something that we must fight for and even die for. And that is why the ethnic world always want to reach a consensus and say who among them will take up that position. And I'm asking you now, do we now worship the code of ethnicity and define these country regions where each ethnic group will run its own affairs, its own interest, and then we lower the price the presidency up there? Because the presidency does create a lot of patronage, creating problems which cause us difficulties after 5 years.
Indeed, I'm told that in certain places such as Busia, the Kikuyus and the Kambas had already been warned that if the ruling goes in favor of President Kibaki, they should vacate. The ruling was not Solomonic. The ruling was politically expedient, understandable, and possibly necessary. I do not run away from that fact. But at what time in the history of a country do you begin to sacrifice law at the altar of political expediency? Sometimes you've got to make a resolve and test and let the armed forces of this country and security forces come and say, this is the law. What is the law? It is not true what you have said, that Section 3 of the National Accord says that if there is a conflict, there shall be prevail. No. What it says at Section 5 is this, that the statute made pursuant to Section 15A, subsection 5, shall be read as a part of the Constitution. When it becomes a part of the Constitution, it then becomes subject to the inconsistency clause. So it is not true that it prevails. That would be judicial heresy, that an act of parliament prevails over the Constitution. Cannot and has never been heard anywhere else in the world. That the President shall appoint as a Prime Minister the leader of the party with the largest number of members in Parliament, or failing that, the leader of the largest coalition, so that if PNU can buy people and raise a coalition and have a majority in Parliament, there is no reason why he should not appoint one. But we know that the intention at that time was to appoint the leader of ODM. But as lawyers, when you are gathering the spirit of a law, how far do you go in looking for the spirit? How far do you go? The law says, and this is known throughout the world, that when the words of a statute are clear, then the spirit must be based on the words.
Thank you very much, dear Lord. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have come to the end of it, and I give back the stewardship to Professor Bobby Msiteli.
The word is the bomb of Kenya is not But we say it's only few people who are principles can stand the pressure that went through during the elections. You could have decided to go to ODM, you'll be the MP by now. But he stuck to his principles. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the good work you've done for this country, and you're doing still good for us. Thank you, Professor Eric Kaseka, for your good work you're doing. Continue to lead us, and we shall be able to gather. One day, in a public lecture, post we shall invite the two of you, and we just spend a whole day together so that all of us will be able to come and listen to these great scholars. As I told you yesterday, this was a powerful day. Starting from morning with our colleague Wesley Chebi, our Vice Chancellor, articulating the issues we have gone through as a university, then Professor Eric Kaseka and Dr. Lumumba. Thank you so much, and thank you, God bless you and bless the all that you are doing. So it's a small ceremony that you will be able to do. I'll ask the gift to be given and the photographers, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Big applause. Big applause. Thank you very much. can check what is inside. That's why it's open. It's going to show up to cover himself, right?